An unexpected conflict slowly shattered the calm, and in a matter of seconds, what should have been a peaceful flight turned into a stage for unbelievable drama. It all started with something small. A male passenger seemed dissatisfied with something, whether it was the seat, the service, or perhaps just his own mood. His voice rose, enough to make several heads turn. The cabin crew tried to calm him with a professional smile, but something was different this time. The man refused to be appeased. In a row nearby sat a couple of well-known celebrities. They initially tried to ignore the commotion. However, the growing noise made the situation difficult to ignore. Other passengers became restless, some even taking out their phones, secretly recording what was happening. The man stood up from his seat. His movements were swift, his emotions seemingly uncontrollable. His words became sharper. The cabin crew were no longer simply smiling. They were becoming assertive, trying to restrict the man's movements. This is where the tension reached a new level. One of the celebrities finally spoke up, not with emotion, but with a tone that attempted to calm him down. But that was precisely where the spark of conflict was sparked. The man felt challenged, as if the presence of the public figure was humiliating him. The situation escalated from a mere complaint to a confrontation. Voices rose from both sides. The other passengers were now fully attentive. No one was pretending to be preoccupied with their screens. All eyes were on the drama unfolding in the narrow business class aisle. The celebrity couple didn't intend to stir up trouble, but they didn't back down either. One tried to defuse the situation, touching the other's arm, signaling for calm. But the tension had already built. Words spoken were hard to take back. The cabin crew moved more quickly. One of them took a position between the two, trying to create distance. Their voices were firm and professional, but there was a palpable sense of tension. They knew, if this wasn't brought under control quickly, the flight could be delayed. Some passengers began whispering to each other. Some felt uncomfortable, others curious. More and more cameras were raised. This moment, without realizing it, had become a spectacle. The man seemed increasingly emotional. His hands moved quickly, his expressions filled with anger. But on the other hand, the celebrity couple tried to restrain themselves. One of them was now completely focused on defusing the situation, speaking more softly, trying to shift the tone of the conflict into dialogue. But not all conflicts can be defused with gentle words. Tension lingered in the air, like storm clouds that had yet to break. The cabin crew finally made a decision. This was no longer just a difference of opinion. The signal was given. Within minutes, aviation security officers were summoned. Their presence immediately changed the dynamic of the situation. The previously charged atmosphere became more serious, more controlled. The man continued speaking, but this time his tone began to change. Perhaps it was the pressure of the situation, perhaps the realization that this involved authority. Meanwhile, the celebrity couple chose to remain silent, allowing the officers to handle everything. A brief conversation ensued between the officers and the man. There was no shouting, no overt drama, just a firm decision. All passengers held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And finally, the decision was made. The man was asked to deplane. A rare decision, but in this situation, it was the only way to ensure the safety and comfort of everyone on board. The atmosphere fell silent. There was no applause, no loud comments. There was a strange silence, as if everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. The man was escorted out. His steps still seemed heavy, his emotions still not completely subsided. But the decision was final. The plane door closed behind him. The cabin crew resumed their roles. Their professional smiles returned, though this time it felt a little different. They knew all the passengers had just gone through an unusual moment. The celebrity couple sat back down. There was no triumphant expression, no dramatic reaction. Only a faint trace of exhaustion on their faces. They exchanged glances, as if to say without words, "It's over." Slowly, the atmosphere returned to normal. The cabin lights, the sound of the engines, even the small conversations between passengers began to be heard again. But one thing remained unchanged. The experience that had just occurred would live on in the memory of everyone on board. And somewhere, footage of that moment began to spread. from phone to phone, from story to story. Because sometimes, a flight isn't just about getting from one city to another, it's about the unexpected stories that unfold in between. But the stories didn't stop as the plane finally prepared for takeoff. In fact, as everything seemed to return to normal, a strange feeling began to permeate the cabin. Some passengers still glanced at each other, as if confirming that what had just happened was real, not just an illusion brought on by travel fatigue. A woman in a window seat slowly lowered her phone. Her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline that hadn't yet fully dissipated. She had just recorded part of the incident, and now her mind was filled with questions. Should she share it, or keep it as a personal memory? On the other side of the cabin, a middle-aged man took a deep breath. She tried to reread the magazine she'd previously neglected, but her focus was lost. The letters on the page felt blank, lost to the images of the commotion still ringing in her head. Meanwhile, the cabin crew gathered for a moment in the back. Their conversation was brief, whispered, but clearly a quick assessment of what had just happened. Their professionalism was tested, and for a moment, they allowed themselves to feel relief that the situation hadn't escalated. In their seats, the celebrity couple finally fell completely silent. No more words needed to be said. One closed her eyes, trying to catch her breath, while the other stared straight ahead, her mind likely still replaying the events of the previous minutes. Shortly afterward, the pilot's voice came over the loudspeaker. In a calm, controlled tone, he gave a brief explanation of a minor adjustment before departure. No details, no drama, just enough to reassure the passengers without escalating the situation. The plane finally moved slowly toward the runway. The wheels rolled, and with each passing meter, it seemed as if the incident began to fade away. But for those who witnessed it firsthand, the memories linger, like shadows that are difficult to erase. As the plane lifted off and the city below shrank into a cloud of lights, the atmosphere in the cabin became more reflective. Some passengers began returning to their usual activities, watching movies, listening to music, or simply trying to sleep, but they couldn't completely banish their thoughts. And amidst the now calm journey, one thing became clear. In a confined space like an airplane cabin, human emotions can be incredibly intense. A small spark can turn into a full-blown inferno, and in a short time, create a story that will live on, retold, shared, and remembered long after the plane has landed.